Over the next several minutes, I am going to try to change the way that your brain hears extreme metal. To someone who's never listened to extreme metal, it sounds like noise, pure aggression, no melody, no words, just screaming. But something strange happens. Give that same person enough time, and eventually they stop hearing noise. They start hearing emotion, rhythm, inflection, even lyrics they couldn't hear before. So, what changed? Did the music change? Most people answer this question with one sentence. You just get used to it. But that doesn't exactly explain anything. You don't get used to coffee. You don't get used to wine or jazz or abstract art. Your brain changes how it processes them. Harsh vocals aren't any different. Think back to the first time you heard a foreign language. Unless you spoke it, it probably sounded like one continuous stream of sound. No obvious word boundaries, no recognizable patterns, just noise. Yet, someone fluent doesn't hear noise. They hear meaning. Their ears didn't change. Their perception did. You don't learn to enjoy harsh vocals. You learn to decode them. Think about reading. Right now, you're looking at words. But when you were a child, these weren't words. They were shapes. Meaningless black marks on a page. Nobody taught your eyes to see. They taught your brain what it was looking at. Harsh vocals work the exact same way. Harsh vocals aren't difficult because they're chaotic. They're difficult because your brain hasn't built a dictionary for them yet. This is why metal fans become frustrated when someone says it's just screaming. Because to us, that's like telling a fluent musician that all jazz sounds random, or telling an experienced chef that every spice tastes the same. They're hearing details that beginners literally aren't perceiving yet. You don't have to like extreme metal to understand what's happening here, because you've already experienced it. Right now, you're looking at words, not individual letters, not random shapes, words. But when you were a child, that wasn't true. These weren't words. They were meaningless symbols, little black marks on a page. The letters didn't change. Your eyes didn't change. Your brain learned how to organize what it's seeing. The same thing happens every time we acquire a new skill. The first time you hear a regional accent, you might struggle to understand it. A few weeks later, you barely notice the accent at all. The first time you drink black coffee, it tastes bitter. The first time you read a doctor's handwriting, you barely recognize it as a language. And the first time you hear an unfamiliar accent, every sentence feels like work. The first time you see a death metal logo, you wonder if it's even supposed to be readable. But none of those things become simpler. You became better at recognizing their patterns. Your brain is constantly trying to predict the world around you. It looks for repetition, structure, familiarity. The more often it encounters something, the better it becomes at separating signal from noise. That's why an experienced driver notices hazards a new driver completely misses. It's why a chess master sees opportunities that beginners never recognize. And it's why a lifelong metal fan can hear emotion, rhythm, and even subtle differences between vocalists that a first-time listener simply doesn't. The information was always there. Your brain just didn't know what to do with it yet. Your brain hates uncertainty. When it encounters something unfamiliar, it tries to simplify it. If it can't recognize patterns, it labels the experience as noise, confusion, chaos. But the remarkable thing about the human brain is that it almost never leaves it there. Given enough exposure, it starts building a map. It begins separating signal from noise, structure from randomness, meaning from chaos, and once that happens, you can't unhear it. So, if our brains naturally learn to recognize patterns, what patterns are harsh vocals actually teaching us to hear? Listen to this. What did you hear? To someone experiencing extreme metal for the first time, a death growl can feel like one continuous wall of sound. Everything bleeds together. The attack, the rhythm, the words, the emotion, it all arrives at once. But experienced listeners don't hear one sound. They hear dozens of decisions being made in real time. They hear rhythm, not just the drummer's rhythm, the vocalist's rhythm, where they breathe, where they accent a phrase, where they deliberately rush a line or drag behind the beat. They hear articulation. Some vocalists pronounce every syllable with surgical precision. Others intentionally blur their words into something more primal. Neither approach is wrong. They're communicating different emotions. They hear texture. A low guttural growl doesn't carry the same emotional weight as a desperate mid-range scream. A piercing shriek doesn't feel like a cavernous roar. Even if neither one is traditionally melodic, they're emotionally distinct. There's dynamics. One of the biggest misconceptions about harsh vocals is that they're always at maximum intensity, and they're not. Experienced vocalists can constantly shape their performances. They build tension, they release it, they leave space. Sometimes the most powerful moment isn't the loudest one. It's the one that suddenly pulls back. And perhaps most surprisingly, many experienced listeners eventually begin understanding the lyrics, not because the vocals became clearer, but because the listener learned how to recognize how that vocalist communicates. The patterns stopped sounding random. They became familiar. Think about recognizing the voice of a close friend in a crowded room. Hundreds of people are talking at the same time, yet somehow your brain immediately locks on to that one voice that matters. It isn't because their voice became louder. It's because your brain already knows what it's listening for. Harsh vocals work in almost exactly the same way. Did you catch any of that? People are often amazed that suddenly they hear words they completely missed the first time. That's exactly the phenomenon you're hearing or experiencing. Over time, what once sounded like chaos becomes structured. What once sounded like aggressive becomes expressive. What once sounded meaningless begins carrying emotion. And that's the part people often misunderstand. Metal fans aren't pretending to hear something that isn't there. We're hearing details that experience has taught us to recognize. Did you notice something different that time? So, if harsh vocals aren't just noise and they aren't simply a skill that listeners learn to decode, then one question still remains. Why? Why do they exist at all? If they're harder to understand, if they limit accessibility, if they turn so many people away, why is extreme metal held on to them for decades? The easiest answer would be because they're heavier. But I don't think that's the real answer. Because heaviness isn't just about distortion. It isn't just about lower tunings. And it certainly isn't just about volume. It's about emotion. Think about the last time you witnessed genuine human grief or panic or rage. Nobody sings through those moments. Our voices crack, they tremble, they shake, they become strained. Sometimes we scream. Harsh vocals aren't a rejection of musicality. They're an imitation of emotional reality. They're an artistic decision to communicate feelings that clean vocals oftentimes just can't. Not because one style is objectively better than the other, but because they're trying to express different emotional truths. A clean vocal can communicate heartbreak with incredible beauty. A harsh vocal can communicate despair in a way that feels almost physically uncomfortable. Neither approach is more authentic than the other. They're simply different emotional languages. And that's why harsh vocals have survived. Not because metal fans are trying to be inaccessible, not because we're trying to scare people away, but because there are emotions that lose something when they're polished. There are moments where beauty isn't the point, where clarity isn't the point, where the performance isn't asking to be admired, it's asking to be felt. That's why so many of the most emotionally devastating moments in extreme metal aren't technically the loudest. Sometimes it's the voice cracking, the breath running out, the strain, the imperfection. Those moments remind us that behind every impossible scream, there's still a human being. And maybe that's the greatest misconception of them all. People often assume harsh vocals exist to hide emotion. But for many listeners, they're doing exactly the opposite. They're stripping emotion down to its rawest form. Clean vocals often tell you what someone feels. Harsh vocals often force you to feel it. Of course, that doesn't mean everyone will enjoy them. And it doesn't mean every harsh vocal performance succeeds. Just like every clean singer isn't emotionally convincing by a long shot. Not every scream carries genuine expression. Technique matters. Songwriting matters. Context matters. But reducing all harsh vocals to just screaming is a little like reducing every painting to just colors. It mistakes the medium for the message. And once you understand it, the conversation changes. The question is no longer, why would anyone listen to this? It becomes, what is this trying to express that couldn't be expressed any other way? Every acquired taste tells us something uncomfortable. Human beings don't simply discover meaning. We learn to perceive it, learn how to perceive it. That's true of coffee, wine, art, literature, jazz, extreme metal, which means maybe the question was never, why do metal fans enjoy harsh vocals? Maybe the better question is, what else are we dismissing today? Simply because we haven't learned how to hear it yet. I appreciate you guys for sticking around. This has been Negative Frequencies. Stick around on the next episode. We're going to explore the myth of objectively heavy music. But until then, I appreciate you guys always. Question everything.